Escape from Skull Valley, Arizona. No, I'm not in my usual confines of Texas in the Dallas area. I'm now in Arizona near Prescott. And I'm descending from Prescott into Skull Valley down Iron Springs Road, which is a great little descent that I had done 4 years ago. Just very smooth, very clean. Right here I'm running my Garmin Varia radar. You can't, of course, see it. It's on my bike. But this allows me to look down at my Garmin and be able to tell if there are cars behind me, which allowed me to move to the side when I needed to, but also to take the lane with some confidence and realize that I was clear on the road. So, highly recommended Garmin Varia. I had a good experience with it on this ride. The previous time that I'd been down here, I had used a mirror, but the mirror no longer fits with my aero helmet and my sunglasses, so I decided to go this route. And I specifically got the radar just for this trip and for these kinds of trips where I'm doing ascents and descents and riding alone. And really, I think everyone that's ever owned one of these things has really liked it. And I noticed that a lot of guys that were in Arizona here on the group rides I did had a Garmin Varia radar. So, taking a measure of your life, this is a dangerous thing we do, riding bikes. And if you're doing a lot of solo riding, I'd highly recommend. If you're a triathlete and I'd really recommend getting the Garmin Varia. So anyway, this is a wonderful little descent. The way Arizona works here is you've got your highlands, you've got your lowlands in the valley. The higher elevations are of course, cooler. Prescott's at about 5,300 square feet, 300 square feet, not square feet, 5,300 feet elevation. And here in the valley is more like 4,000 feet. So you're giving up about 2,000 feet going from Prescott down into the valley here. It's called Skull Valley because apparently, according to Wikipedia, the early settlers here found a lot of remains of Native Americans. So who knows, maybe there was some kind of massacre or something here. They call it Skull Valley. And this ride is pretty popular among riders in the area because it's this nice little loop that starts in Prescott. You do a descent and you're in the valley, and then you do an ascent back into Prescott. And you can go either clockwise or counterclockwise. And the usual way to do it is to go clockwise down this road called the White Spar Road, which is more of an up and down kind of thing. And you get into the valley. Excuse me, I'm saying the wrong thing. It's the opposite way. People like to go counterclockwise. They like to come do the ascent up the White Spar Road and do the descent on the road that I'm doing now, which is Iron Springs. The reason they don't like to do the clockwise version is because locals say that the climb up this particular road that I'm doing, Iron Springs, is more difficult because it's a constant climb instead of a sort of up and down where you get some breaks where you're both going up and down. I don't know, I kind of feel like when you're going up and down an ascent, it's inefficient. And if I want to get to the end first, I don't want to do another descent because that means that's more climbing that I'm going to have to do to get back up. But I really found the ascent when I did it 4 years ago up the White Spars to be very difficult. So there in the red Radio Shack kit you saw just briefly, we'll see him in a second, is Gino, whom I'd never met before. But Gino is someone that lived in Texas a long time. I think he said he lived in the Plano area for some 20 plus years and was a frequent participant in the pop ride. And not just recently, but the pop ride for years and years and years with George and others. And so it was really cool to meet someone not only from Texas, not only from close to where I live, but who did the very ride that I do all the time. So having something in common with cyclists you meet 1,000 miles away is pretty cool. So here we are actually riding together, and that was the group of cyclists we'd rebunched together. I had met them. So what happened was I forgot my shoes, so I missed the start. So I did the ride in the opposite direction of what the group ride was going to do, because then I would meet them in the valley. So I'm going down Iron Springs, the video you just watched, and they had come the other way through the up and down White Spars, and I met them in the valley, and now I'm going back doing out and back up this Iron Springs Road into Prescott. And Gino is riding on my left, and you can see there's a group ahead of us that is the lead group, so to speak. So I mentioned this in my previous video. One thing that's really different about group rides I found in Prescott in Arizona here is they don't really ride together. It's sort of we start together, We ride all separately, and then we meet up and we stop and we wait for everyone to regroup, and then we break up again. And this is even on the flat. So this is very different than my style of riding, where the only way you're really going off the front is if you're hammering like crazy, because we're on the flats and the efficiency of the group is so much better than the efficiency of one person. But when you get to a place that has elevation and climbing, the differences in power and power to weight is just so stark that it's hard to stay together. And you may also have, because of the limited numbers of people that are riding, you're going to have people that are more like your A riders, your B riders, and your C riders all in one relatively small group. And it's really hard for such different levels of ability to all stay together. So I didn't look at the power numbers before this video. I'm looking at them now for the first time. And Gino here is, we've been talking a little bit, and Gino's moving up the road here, and we are going to try to bridge to these guys that are up the road. So it's not been a terribly hard effort so far, but, we're working a little bit here. And we're going to be trying to move up. And you can see that the percent grade is not too difficult right now, 3%, 4%. I'm actually on my crit bike, the bike that I use for crit racing, Specialized Alley Sprint, 54 centimeters. I have the 150 millimeter stem on here. I have the 38 centimeter narrow bars. It's completely set up like I ride in crits in Texas. And I don't have a compact crank. I have the regular crank in the front, and I have my regular cassette. So it is not optimized for climbing. However, I found that 6% is fine, 7% is okay, percent not loving it, but it's okay. Anything higher than 8% is really difficult on this particular setup on my bike, mainly because I'm starting to run out of gears. There was one climb I did on a group ride later on this trip, and it was 12%. It wasn't a very long climb, but 12%. For me to have an adequate cadence of like over 70, I had to do something like 450 watts in my lowest gear. So not ideal for this. Climbing. So let's talk a little bit about the elevation here. From what I could tell on Strava, 4,155 feet at the lowest point in the valley on the ride, and the very top of where we're headed towards was 6,021 feet. So just under 2,000 feet of climbing from approximately that gas station to where we'll be ending the climb on top of the mountain here. The temperatures really varied on this ride. According to my Garmin, they varied from a low of 73 degrees, which was at the beginning of the ride, probably at the highest elevation, and then in the valley up to 100 degrees. But most of the readings later on were in the mid-90s. Of course, it's very dry in Arizona, so it doesn't quite feel as hot as it would in other places that have a higher degree of humidity. In terms of the length of the climb, about 45 minutes, depending on where you start the climb. So there's a Strava segment that says Skull Valley Cemetery to the top of the climb. It was about 45 minutes for me, and it was about an average of 227 watts during those 45 minutes. Now, this was just my second day at altitude, and so I wasn't really sure how I was going to approach this. I didn't know who I was riding with, and really didn't know how difficult it would be, how fast they would go, would I be able to stay up with people. Of course, I'm not thinking I'm going to blow everyone away or anything like that. I'm going to be riding off the front. But we just see how it goes, try to have fun. And of course, sometimes I tell myself, oh, I'll just take it easy, don't overdo it, don't ruin the rest of your week. And then something competitive takes over and you find yourself riding at the very limit. I think we've all been there. And, well, let's see how it goes. So we have a small group of guys here. I'm taking my turn on the front as Gino had taken his turn, as we're working together to move up to this group ahead of us, and it's not a super hard effort to move up here. This area is really quite beautiful in its own stark way. It's a deserty area, of course, not a lot of precipitation. They start to get the monsoons in July and August, so that's really the only time it really rains, apparently, in Arizona. And 4 years ago when I was on this very road, I had to go to the bathroom, and you see some of this sort of gravel sand on the side of the road. So I kind of peel off slowly, just come to a stop off the road. I ride off the road into the sand. Well, I didn't know it was sand. I completely come into it like a plow. My bike careens over and I fall over into a cactus, or got some kind of spines on me and cut myself. Really different than Texas. I was expecting dirt, hard packed dirt. That's what we have in Texas. Well, not so much in Arizona. You got to be careful. It's a different place. It's a little bit different in the way the whole thing works. The rain, the sand, the dirt, and so forth. So we're finally making the junction here. And when I had met up with these guys before that convenience stop where we had that footage, there were two guys that were off the front of the rest of the group. And I'd said hi to them, and they said, yeah, we're part of the group. And I'd waited a little bit longer and met up with the people in the back of the group. And then I had proceeded to bridge up to those two guys in the front. So I had the idea that two of these guys up here are the strongest guys in the ride. And of course, they're at the ride right now. And one of them is the guy directly in front of me, and the other guy is in the white jersey with the Pinarello, who is in front of me as well. And I think, there's three guys in this group ahead of us? I can't really tell for the moment. That's my memory of it, and of course that will become clear in just a second. So let's talk a little bit about climbing when you don't have any practice climbing. So there is no way for me in Texas to practice a 2,000-foot climb or a 3,000-foot climb or something like that. A climb for us might be like a minute, a 60-second climb, and not even particularly that steep even. So we don't have a lot of opportunities to do climbing. Probably the best would be in south of Dallas, the Cedar Hill area that's in southwest of Dallas, but even that does not compare to this at all. So now we have our group of 5 people here that have joined together on this climb. So I found that climbing is not particularly sophisticated. It's just a matter of power and your weight, your cadence, and your gears. So climbing, you cannot just coast up a mountain. You have to keep spinning. You have to keep moving your legs. And the best way I think that I know of as a flatlander to practice this is to ride a trainer. So if you can ride a trainer, let's say for 200 watts for 2 hours straight, or an hour and a half, or whatever it is, you can substitute a different number in there for 200 watts, whether it's 220, 250, whether it's 150 or 125. What can you constantly hold for the duration that it would take to go up that climb? Practice that on the trainer. One caveat is when you're at elevation and you're not normally at elevation, like me, I'm in Dallas and I go up to a mile high, there's less oxygen. So you can't put out quite as much power without as much oxygen. Just like a fire is not going to burn as hotly without the same amount of oxygen, your own internal fire, your own energy producing mechanisms, your muscles are not going to work as efficiently at elevation. So don't expect to have don't expect to hit your top power targets 2 days at elevation. You just will not have adapted, and you won't have the same oxygen carrying capacity as the people that live up in this area. And of course, I'm riding here with people that all live up here. And that's a whole nother ball of wax, which is all these people that do these weekday morning rides, which for us working folks, it doesn't really work for most of us. Anyway, those of us that worked regular hours, kind of 8 to 5 sort of stuff. But what I found up here in Arizona is that there are a lot of retired people. Prescott is one of the retirement capitals of the United States. It's in the top 10 list of best places to retire. So there are a lot of retired people. And you can't really judge exactly who's retired and not, because you see some people that look awfully young and they're retired and all they do is have fun and cycle and do stuff like this. And gosh, it sure is tempting to think about retiring. So here we can see that we're at a little bit of a flat spot here, even less than 1%. So a little break for us as we're headed up this climb. And so climbing, you don't need to practice. You don't need to go to a mountain to be able to ride up a mountain. So last year, for example, in Colorado, I did the Wolf Creek Pass. Again, it was like my first or second day in Colorado. And I just said, that seems like the goal that I wanted to do in the place I was. So I just did it. And it wasn't particularly hard. I mean, it wasn't easy, but I just had to keep pedaling. And if you can keep pedaling, you can go up a mountain. So in this case, you have to make sure that you have the right gears. For example, if you do not have enough power to do the cadence required to spin, at the spin rate you need to do. So, for example, let's say you could only do 175 watts, but that 175 watts at this particular grade only yields a cadence of 30. That's going to be really difficult. So you want to be able to sprint properly. So one precaution would be to have compact crankset on the front, or you can change out your cassette in the back, and that may require a different derailleur hanger. So a different derailleur, you might have to buy an extended derailleur hanger setup for your particular, and I've done that before with a different bike when I was going to Colorado and not really sure that I could handle the grades here. But all the grades here I found were fine in terms of being able to go up this climb and some other climbs that I did on this ride. So you can see here the gentleman in front of me. The guy on the right, I think his name is Michael, and I think actually the guy right in front of me is named Mike. I apologize if I got their names wrong. But you can see right in front of me, he is running a Garmin Varia, the radar, the horizontal kind. And again, like I said, a lot of the guys are running Garmin Varia, and highly recommend doing so if you do a lot of solo riding. It's not terribly useful if you're always riding in groups, I think, but even then, it may have some utility. The guys were telling me they really feared going up the last mile and a half of the climb, and we're going to see that in a little bit because it did get really difficult. The guy on the right here, he's in his like mid-late 20s, I understand, so he was kind of the youngster in the entire group. Not to get into everyone's business, but the guy in front of me on the Pinarello, he didn't look particularly old to me, but he's retired for quite a while himself. So maybe I need to get my financial stuff in order so that I can retire early and just ride my bike all the time. So at this point, I don't have the rear view, but you can see that I've really not done any work on the front. And of course, when you are going uphill and going relatively slowly, you're not going to get a whole lot of aerodynamic benefit from drafting, meaning that the penalty for being on the front is not nearly as bad as, say, that you're on the flats going 25, 30 miles an hour. But even so, you notice from the Tour de France, there is a little bit of benefit from drafting and being in the back. One benefit of this particular day on this particular route was that we had a little bit of a tailwind or a cross tailwind. And so that helped. It also meant that there was a little bit of a headwind coming down. So I blame that headwind for my crappy Strava numbers going down. But again, I don't like the descent. The descents are the thing that scare me a lot more than going up. So I don't care how slow I go down. Not my concern. So on the total ascent, I think I mentioned is about 45 minutes from the cemetery to the top. And that ended up being about 35th in terms of the Strava rankings. 35th out of about 450, somewhere in that range. And that's certainly not bragging on my part, but when I did the loop in the other direction, so going up the White Spar ascent, I had almost dead last in terms of how I did that climb. And I can tell you, your Strava time's not going to be very good if you're so tired you have to get off your bike and lay on the side of the road. That's going to really hurt your time. And so what I'm saying is that in the 3 or 4 years since I was last in Prescott, I've made a huge leap in terms of my fitness, such that I'm not doing the worst time anymore. And so that feels a little bit good. You put in your work, you do something and you're one of the worst, and then you come back later, you've done a lot of work, and you may not be the best or even that close to the best, but you're not an embarrassment anymore. And again, there's nothing embarrassing about last place. There's nothing embarrassing about being the slowest. You're out there, you're trying, you're working. I'm not going to pick on anybody, but there's something a local racer says from time to time, that one of his goals is to not be last. And I recognize what he's saying and what he means. It means you try your best, you be competitive, you try to at least, beat out somebody else in the race. I don't think there's anything wrong with being last. And so it's just a slightly different psychological take to things. There may be a good reason that you're last. For example, you did work for your teammates, you completely exhausted yourself, you fell out of the group, and now you're last. Well, that's okay. You did something useful. You gave it your best. And even if you didn't try to do anything for anyone else, you just happened to be the worst person in terms of fitness, I don't think you need to feel bad about that either. You were in the ring. You were fighting. You were trying. Now, if you're not trying and you didn't give a good effort and you wanted to give a good effort, yeah, then you can feel bad about yourself. But there's nothing wrong with having a last place Strava time up a climb or anything like that. But we do like in this business, those of us that are in cycling, I think most of us like to improve. And most of us like to see the rewards of our efforts. So 35 on Strava, when I saw that, that felt a little bit good. Like I'd kind of redeemed myself a little bit. So you can tell, well, I think this guy in front of me is a freaking monster. And I was really struggling after a time. So we're not to the part where I think I'm really struggling, but 136 beats per minute. So of course we had the five guys, right? And I think the other guy in the white jersey, I looked back, after a bit, and he was gone. It was just four of us. And then I looked back a little bit later, and it was Gino was gone. I couldn't see him, and so it was just the three of us. The guy in front of me, and then the guy who was in the camouflage. He has the camouflage steel bike, and it was just the three of us. And after a bit of being on this gentleman's wheel, I looked back and it was just me and him. I couldn't see anybody. Everyone was gone, just me and him. And so this guy was a force of nature in front of me. So maybe if I lived there in Prescott, got adapted to the elevation, I lost some weight, had a different bike set up, and I definitely would try to lose weight if I lived in Arizona here, just for biking purposes. Maybe I could keep up with this guy. So I didn't get this guy's full history. He told me a little bit. I know he used to race. I think he used to live in the Midwest or something. But anyway, he used to race. So he's used to be competitive. And to what degree, I don't know, but I suspect to a pretty decent degree. I'll be putting up a video later, and I was talking to some guys, and I had mentioned that we were in a group and doing this climb, and I looked back, and there was only one person on my wheel, and they said, "Oh, that was so-and-so." And they was like, "Oh yeah, he used to, he almost made the Olympics on track racing, and did the Olympic trials, and of course he's retired now and not nearly as fast as he was when he was doing the Olympic trials." So you never know who you're going to meet out here. And honestly, I think there are more pros in this tiny area of Prescott than there probably are in all of Dallas. Uh, Chloe Woodruff is a local that lives in Prescott. And Travis McCabe is from Prescott and apparently spends a lot of time in Prescott, and is well known to the people here. So he rides from time to time here. And there are, I think, plenty others. Well, of course, I'm not familiar with all the names of Continental pros and mountain bike pros and such, but there's a substantial number of super excellent cyclists that live in this area. And there are people that come up from Phoenix, which isn't too far away, and ride up in this area as well. So I did not run into Chloe Woodruff when I was out here in Prescott. Although I certainly had the idea that maybe that could be possible. She would ride by me, or, I don't even know if I would recognize her. However, I do follow her on Strava because it was recommended to me if I wanted to know the mountain kinds of paths and trails to take while I was in Prescott, that I could follow her on Strava. So, to be honest, I'd never heard of her before a couple months ago when I started following her on Strava, which is, again, I don't follow everything. I assume that she's a pretty well-known cyclist to anyone that follows local U.S. mountain biking, and I think maybe she does some road racing as well. Anyway, I don't know all her history, but she's done very well, and she's had some excellent results in women's pro racing. Anyway, so my point is, she did this same exact climb the next day, And so I was curious. I compared her climb to my climb. And as I recall, she did it 8 minutes faster. So I did it in 45 minutes. She shaved off 8 minutes from my time. So when I was thinking about that 8 minute number, um, I thought, well, gosh, I had like this perfect lead out for almost the entire way up. I had mostly a tailwind, and I tried pretty dang hard. So it was not easy. And she just completely blew me out of the water by 8 minutes. So there's a huge gap between the best women cyclists in the United States and myself. And that is not a surprise to me. That is not a surprise at all. But 8 minutes is a lot of time, you know. Imagine Chloe Woodruff waiting for me to finish the climb and having to wait 8 minutes for me. Yeah, that's a long time. So, but that's the kind of, those are the kinds of differences you can see in a climb where there's a big difference in fitness and especially uh, um, power to weight ratio, because that's the most important factor in climbing. So you can see here there's still at least three of us left. Because I don't have the rear view, I'm not exactly sure when other people peeled off. But the two guys in front of me, they're strong, and the guy in the very front right now, he's eventually going to be dropped. And later on, when he caught up to us at the very top, he just said, just kind of the legs didn't have the power. Um, and so let's take a look at our numbers right now. So we're actually on a little bit of a false flat here. We're getting a little bit of a descent, and so speed is, of course, picking up here. And of course, that's the nature of climbing. A lot of times you'll have a few areas where you get a little bit of a descent before you have a little bit of a climb. And, I'm running much deeper wheels than these guys. I'm running the 60 millimeter carbon wheels flow. The guy in front, he's running a lot less deep wheels, and I'm not sure exactly what he's running, but I assume it's a pretty lightweight rig, although he's on a steel bike, so he's could be lighter weight than he really is. So, um, let's see, how far into the video are we? We are 27 minutes and change up, and have I completely run out of things to talk about? I think I've covered a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about. Um, what else can we talk about climbing that would be useful to think about and understand? Um, so we could take a look at my cadence here. So my cadence is at 90, and that means I'm going pretty hard. So, I mean, usually if I'm not going too hard, I won't be at a 90 cadence. I won't be spinning that fast. I know a lot of people do, but doing a climb over 300 watts here at elevation, keeping up with these guys, is um, requiring a little bit higher cadence, and spin it to win it. There is efficiency that can be had with higher spinning. I've mentioned before this issue of heart rate at elevation. So in the past, 2 or 3 years ago in Colorado, I was riding in the Carbondale, Aspen, Glenwood Springs area, which so far in my experience in traveling to places with elevation, that has been my favorite place for road biking in terms of experiencing climbs, and I think it's the best place to ride that I've experienced. So if you get the chance to be in Carbondale, Aspen area, I'd highly recommend it, because you have this main drag, this railroad track, converted railroad track drag that goes all the way from Glenwood Springs to Aspen. It's not terribly steep because it's a railroad track formerly. And then you have all these like side roads and side trails and things that you can tack on, some gravel, some not. I did a lot of gravel on my road bike, had a couple flat tires, but it was all navigable except for the very steep parts where you get to like 10, 11, 12%. And if you stop riding and you're on gravel on a 23 millimeter wheel, you cannot start again. You cannot spin and get your bike going. You may have to walk up a section if that's the case. But I noticed that my heart rate just wouldn't go up. I mean, I could be dead tired, feel like I was just completely full of lactic acid, and I'd look down and my heart rate would be 140. And I think, I was curious about that. I tried to look it up, And if I recall correctly, it has something to do with your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems at elevation. Like the parasympathetic nervous system, that is what slows your heart rate down. The sympathetic nervous system is what speeds your heart rate up. So when you get an adrenaline push, that's going to raise your heart rate. And then the parasympathetics is what slows your heart rate down when you're resting. It gives the signal that your heart rate should slow down. So for some reason, I think you get overactivation of your parasympathetic nervous system when you're at higher elevation. However, having said that, I think my heart rate was easier to go higher on this trip than it was previously a couple 3 years ago. And I think maybe I was just in better shape this time, and I just have capacity to do more work, and it elevated my heart rate. And maybe there's some function of, you just can't get the furnace burning hot enough at elevation because of the lack of oxygen, and thus the heart demands may not be quite as high because you're not doing quite as much work, which goes along with the whole sort of um, train low, sleep high. So this is not hugely sustainable for me to be going 350 watts on this guy's wheel at elevation on my second day at elevation. And at a certain point here, um, I mentioned to him, everyone's gone. And he's like, oh, and then a little bit after that, I yell to him, I say to him, I cannot stay on your wheel. Keep going. Well, I didn't say keep going. I just said you're gonna have to go on without me. I cannot stay on your wheel. I cannot sustain this. And and he was like, I don't mind riding with you. I ride alone all the time. I'll just stay with you. And I did appreciate that. I'd rather ride with someone. I'd rather get a little bit of a lead out if I can. Very generous of him. Of course, he knew he could blow me away at any minute. And you're going to see at the very end, he does finally ride away with me to get right away from me to, do the pace that he wants to do, to get to the top in the fashion that he wants to. But this guy was just a beast. I wonder how much he weighs. I think he weighed less than me, but I wondered to what degree, and it'd be interesting to see what his power numbers are. I don't even know if he has a power meter. I went on Strava, and I didn't see that he actually uploaded to Strava, so I wasn't able to look at his numbers and do any comparison in that fashion. People can be on a $10,000 bike, but they're not on Strava. In fact, maybe the more expensive your bike, the less likely you are to be on Strava. Isn't there some unwritten rule that if you're a Cat 1, like you can't be on Strava, or you can only like put on the podunk rides where you're not doing any kind of real workout and put it on Strava? It seems like the more serious someone is, the less likely they are to be on Strava. And I think there are legitimate reasons to not be on Strava, including privacy, including someone else owning your data. Does Strava say they own our data? I know that was a controversy recently with this whole Relive thing where they said Relive wasn't following their rules about the use of data. And then DC Rainmaker comes in and says that Strava's not interpreting their own terms correctly because technically they don't really own the data. They're just using the data. So anyway, I don't pay attention to all that. But the point is, there's a lot of people that aren't on Strava. And, you know, I think we all go through these phases where you first start cycling, you discover Strava, you think, oh, this is really cool. And then you start looking at these segments and where you rank on the segments. And the first time you get a KOM, it's like a big deal. And then you start going KOM hunting and all this jazz, and all this stuff really matters to you. And how many followers you have, and if someone's following you and you followed them but they didn't follow you back, all this crap matters and stuff to some degree. Then I think after that's like one phase of cycling, and then the next phase of cycling is you don't care about all that. You don't care about KOMs. You don't care about stuff like that. You're not pursuing KOMs. And you're still, putting titles in and maybe some descriptions. The next phase of cyclists are the guys that are too cool. They're on Strava, but they're too cool to ever change their titles or put in a description or otherwise, to some degree, even acknowledge to anyone else that they look at Strava or, respond to anything. Like maybe once in a while they respond to a comment or once in a while they dish out a kudo to someone. Then, of course, the last phase of cycling nirvana is to not be on Strava at all. We got the one phase in between where you have the occasional once in a while ride that you put up on Strava, and then you disappear from Strava altogether. And who knows where you are? All you really get are like first place results in local crits and road races and regional crits and road races, and that's sort of your Strava. That's how you are connected socially to other riders. So, uh, a little bit of sarcasm there, but I think there's some truth to that as well. But certainly, I don't begrudge anyone for not being on Strava. So, gosh, this guy is just motoring and motoring. I haven't been paying attention to my power numbers, but I just saw some 300 watts here and there, and heart rate of 147. So I have a lower peak heart rate than and I think this is where we're looking back and like, where is everybody? Oh, it's just two. And he was like, oh, and so uh, I have a lower heart rate than the average person for my age, which is it's probably not a performance benefit. I don't know if it's a performance detriment. It's a little bit genetic. And of course, it's age related. As we get older, our peak heart rate decreases. And there's formulas for that, more than one formula. I've used one of these formulas in a research paper I have done, which is not to say I'm a cardiovascular expert, but I have done some research peripherally in the area of cardiovascular research. So, um, for me to see the 160s is really sort of like last lap of a crit situation. 170 is maybe the last part of an all-out sprint, all-out effort in a crit. That is breakthrough fitness area for me. And 150s is going hard. And so for me at 149 here, almost 150, this is not easy for me. And probably elevation is tamping down that heart rate a little bit. And so the perceived effort, I think, is um, higher than the heart rate. I looked at the MPA for the ride. So the MPA on the left side of the bar is the maximal power available. It's an exert metric, XERT. If you follow my channel, you'll know I've talked a lot about exert. I've probably posted more videos with exert MPA data than anyone else in the world. Finally, I'm number one at something in the world. And this is a measure of how much I have left in the tank um, based on uh, um, based on my prior rides and the metrics that Exert puts together. So this is a way of, if it's on my Garmin, it's a field that I can put on my Garmin. I can have sort of a idea of how hard I'm going. Well, anyway, when you do some ride analysis, I can look at what the Exert metrics look like, and my MPA was never really dipped very much on this ride, despite how hard it felt. So this is a case where the MPA and the perceived effort did not coincide with each other. I would have expected, based on my perceived effort, that the MPA would have been much lower. Like, I'd be at, like 1100 MPA. For me, if I get to something like 700 MPA, I am really hurting. I am really in the red. Um, I'm not feeling great when I'm at 1100 MPA. But looking at the current MPA of 1325 or so, I would have a lot of energy left and a lot left in the tank. And everyone else has been dropped, I think, at this point. And I've yo-yoed off this guy's wheel a bit. I am not. at 100% in terms of how I'm feeling on this ride. So a lot of that has to do with the elevation. So what I would suspect is that if you're doing some kind of stage race or some kind of race out of your normal environment, you're going to have to account. There are going to be differences in how exert and the MPA is going to work. So, for example, if you live in Prescott, like my sister-in-law's husband does, so that's another question. If I have a sister-in-law and she has a husband, is that my brother-in-law? I don't think that's correct. I think it's more correct to say husband of sister-in-law, because I would think your brothers-in-law and sisters-in-law are all people that um, uh, are either married to your own siblings or they're the siblings of your spouse, not the people that are married to those people. But I've never really gotten a good answer on that. Anyway, he's a triathlete. He lives in Prescott. He goes to Hawaii for the Ironman. Maybe he can put out more power than he does at elevation. So maybe he would need to adjust those metrics. In this case, he doesn't use exert, so it's not a particularly important thing that he'll have to think about. But if he did, maybe he can put, well, whatever metrics he's using, he has a power meter. He might expect that maybe he can do a bit more power with more oxygen. Um, so, yeah, and if you're doing the opposite, like me, you're going from near sea level, like 1,000 feet elevation, to 6,000 feet elevation, you're going to have to downgrade your estimation, I think, of how much you can put out in terms of watts. There's something really beautiful about just doing a climb. You don't get to do it. I was talking with Sam. He has a YouTube channel that's closely related to mine. He was part of my inspiration for starting my own YouTube channel and has given me a lot of technical advice about how to make videos, including the strip, the dashware strip you see at the bottom. Would not have been able to do that without his assistance. I was talking with him, he was talking about me being in Prescott and climbing, and he says, I miss the climbs. And boy, it would be so much fun if there was a close climb to where we lived here in Dallas, and that was part of the regular route in terms of doing rides and climbing, and it would be fun. Of course, it would change the nature of our group rides and how it worked, but just like it's changed things here in Prescott and how they do their rides. But there's something really fun about a climb, and a lot of the times if we're going on vacation and we're going to do climbs, we're going to be doing them by ourselves. It'll be a solo effort because there's not going to be a group ride. There's not often, I think, a lot of group rides that say, hey, let's do a huge climb. So you're going to be doing it solo. This was a unique opportunity to actually be doing it with other people, which made it even more fun. And I don't think I would have ridden up nearly as fast or gone as hard if I wasn't trying to stay on this gentleman's wheel. And I can't remember if we're at the point yet where I told him I was giving up. Not giving up, but that I just could not handle his pace at 320 watts constantly on his wheel, and he slows up. But eventually, we're gonna see that we're probably slowing up. Maybe this is the part I can't recall. But eventually, he's gonna ride away from me, and he was really helpful. He was saying, "Okay, we've got 1.5 miles to the top." And I looked down at my Garmin and I kind of did like the math. And I'm like, okay, we're at like 30, whatever we were at, like 39 miles, and I was like looking down every once in a while to see how the mileage was passing, and I was like, it is going so slowly. 1.5 miles at this pace is going to take a long time, and so that was a measure of suffering. So here we're seeing, just a moment ago, it was saying a grade of 6%, and just for a second up 7%. I don't know how accurate this fit file is from Garmin in terms of measuring the exact gradient, but 5%, 6%. If you're watching the tour, they're not going to be super impressed with that Tour de France. They're going to be saying that that's a climb that's going to be suited to a lot of riders. And it's when it pitches up very steeply that you're going to have some guys that get a huge advantage, and they're going to have the ability to attack. So here we're seeing like 8%. And just got this more machine than man in front of me here. Of course, one thing you don't really get to do when you're suffering is appreciate the scenery. Of course, appreciating the scenery can mean keeping an eye on the roads and keeping an eye on traffic and so forth, but both of us are running Garmin Varia, so that's, with the Garmin Varia, it will give off a beep when it senses there is a car coming from behind. And maybe I know his, but maybe mine too, has a certain blinking pattern related to whether cars are coming or not. And I don't know what the blinking pattern is, but apparently I've read that other cyclists that are following that don't have Garmin Varia can look at that blinking pattern and make some determination of whether there's a car behind. And also, more than one person can actually take in the Garmin Varia data. So you can have, Garmin Varia, but if you're riding really closely and you are set up to pick up the sensor, you've set up your headset such that it can do that. More than one person can actually take advantage of the Garmin Varia. So if this is the part where I get completely unhitched, then we are getting relatively close to the top here. And if you've done climbs, you know this feeling of like, you think you're at the top, you're getting to the rise, and you're like, that's the top. And then you get there and it's not the top. And you're like, okay, that next pitch up there, that's the top. And then that's not the top. So knowing exactly where the top is can be a huge advantage, at least psychologically. So in this case, I didn't really have to worry about that because the guy in front of me here had told me approximately the distance to the top. And of course, if you've done this climb many, many times, you have a good sense of metering out your efforts and what it's going to take to get to the top. And so, yeah, that's an advantage. They always talk about guys in races that have done a particular route time after time after time have a big advantage in terms of being able to do that. So it looks like as the gradient goes down a little bit here, that I'm able to catch on a little bit, catch up a little bit to him. But certainly as the pitch rises, I'm starting to run out of gas, and the legs are not cooperating. They are full of lactic acid. I'm breathing really hard. So that's another, when I'm huffing and puffing and making a lot of noise breathing, and the guy in front of you, you can't even hear him breathing. Yeah, you get the sense that one person is stronger than the other person. A little bit of a respite here as we are getting a little bit of a downhill and able to pick up some speed. And we are not yet to the top of the climb, so a little bit we'll still be going. I'm going to be bringing out some other video content related to this trip, including some road bike stuff and including some gravel stuff, and finally some mountain biking stuff. I'm not a gravel grinder guy and I'm not a mountain biker, but I did have the opportunity to do both on my full squish Trek mountain bike, and that was fun. That was a good experience. And I'm not going to, of course, have any power data because I do not have a power meter on my mountain bike, but that's fine. We don't all live by power. We don't all live by TSS. So what if our metrics have dropped because we didn't get credit for any of those rides? Oh well. It's all about having fun and having a good time. Although I wouldn't mind having a power meter eventually for my mountain bike. And certainly if I had a gravel bike and was using it all the time, I'd definitely get a power meter. But I'm going to be bringing out some of that content shortly as time allows, and I can put something together and comment on it because learn some things on there. I'm going to be talking about e-bikes. My video before this one talked about e-bikes. E-bikes were a real revelation to me. Of course, I knew about them, but I'd never ridden with people on e-bikes. And so now I have an idea of what it's like to ride with people on e-bikes, what the future is with e-bikes, and what we're going to be seeing and what the dynamics of that are. It's coming. It is coming. In some places, it is already there, and where it is already there, it will be growing. And the future is a lot of e-bikes. I guarantee it. As the price of e-bikes go down, as their utility increases for all kinds of different reasons, people will be riding e-bikes, and you will see them very commonly. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think we need to mourn that. The people in Dallas are going to be the last people to adopt e-bikes. The only thing they have going for them in Dallas is relative affluence. So there's a lot of people that can afford e-bikes. But from a riding standpoint, it is the least required. It's one of the places where you don't really need an e-bike for most cases. But we can talk about the whys of that and the why nots of that. But certainly, it was a revelation to me, and it was, it messes with your mind a little bit when you're riding with people on e-bikes, or you're thinking, am I right? Is this an e-bike? Is this not an e-bike? What does it? Am I chasing an e-bike? Am I drafting an e-bike? Um, anyway, e-bikes are a big part of cycling's future. I think I'm finally to the top. Here I am. I made it. And even though I'm exhausted, my MPA is still quite high. We have crested the climb. We have gotten our Strava credit for passing the top. And now we're going to sit here and wait for the rest of the guys. Uh, it was not a short wait. The guy with the camo gear, he is the next person to finish. And these guys were a little bit pressed for time. And so we decided that we did not or should not wait for everybody else. And we ended up leaving together. And I met up with my relatives that were not too far away from this location. So it was a great ride. Be careful, your bike might try to run away on you. It was kind of funny. This guy right here, I apologize. I think his name is Mike, but I may be messing it up. As we were about to go down the descent here into Prescott, so there's a little bit of a descent here into Prescott proper. He was saying, oh, yeah, be really careful here because, you get going 40, 50 miles an hour and cars will pull out in front of you. And he related an instance where a car pulled out in front of him and he ended up flipping over the front of the car and miraculously didn't get hurt. But that is not great reassurance to a flatlander like myself in terms of confidence in descending of, be careful that you don't get killed by all the cars that aren't going to see you as you're coming down. And, when the wind is really picking up, the descents with these 60 millimeter wheels, a little bit of bouncing around in the bike in terms of wobble, at least in one point on one of these rides, was a little bit hairy. But we made a little bit of a descent there. So that was fun too. And so, of course, my descent was not as long because I didn't go all the way into town. But that's neither here nor there. So, uh, fun to do a group ride up a climb in a place that is far from home, far out of my comfort zone. And I had a good time. So, if you have the opportunity to do some climbs, highly suggest that you do so. And like I said, the best practice for going up these climbs, it's not necessarily to do a climb. Well, great. If you have the opportunity to do it, do it. But work on the trainer. Just work on constantly pedaling. Can you keep the momentum going? If you can keep the momentum going on a trainer for an hour, for an hour and a half, for 2 hours, then you're going to have the muscular endurance to be able to do a climb. And you can do it at your own pace. And you'll learn a little bit what that pace is. Just make sure you have enough gears for the amount of power and the cadence that you want to do. And there's some calculators for that kind of stuff where you can make a best guess at that. If you want to err on the side of being careful, you can get some appropriate, get an appropriate cassette and derailleur and compact crank for that. But it's not necessarily required. If the grades aren't too steep and you can put out a fair amount of power, then you won't need to change anything up. It's been my experience that a regular crank and a regular cassette, I think my cassette wasn't above 25 in the back and did fine. So I will leave it at that, and we will continue with other content later. If you have suggestions, comments, questions, please feel free to pose them in the comments below. I don't pretend to be an expert in anything. I am not an expert. In some ways, I think it's completely ridiculous to take any advice from me. So I don't recommend that anyone in particular take any advice from me. This is just me recounting my experiences and perspective in terms of my love of cycling and my enjoyment of it. So, I guess I'd like to grow the channel a little bit in the sense of eventually getting 1,000 subscribers. That'll be the end goal. I don't care. Just 1,000 subscribers, and maybe I'll get to that someday, but it's been slow going. And even if I don't, who cares? It's just all a labor of love. So, hope you're enjoying your cycling, and we will tune in next time to talk a little more gravel stuff in Prescott, some mountain stuff in Prescott, and some more road stuff in Prescott. So, that content will be coming up, interspersed with the usual Dallas stuff and my usual thoughts. So, hope you're taking care and doing well. Goodbye.